Thanks, and good morning to all of you. You might say, why? Why are we looking at efficiency? But for all of you in healthcare, I think there's a real quick answer to that. I'm sure all of you from an HR perspective are being asked every day on how to control costs, but offer more. And so as you think about where you can make change and where you can make difference, this is one area that we thought it was very important to look at. So why insource exec recruiting? The easy answer is to reduce costs, and I already mentioned that as we've looked at what are the different things that we could do within our HR organization, certainly this is an area where our partners have not changed their cost structure at all. Most of the exec search firms, unless you've seen something different, are still asking for 33% of total cash comp to do one search. Very expensive. If you think of an average cost of one of your top leaders at $500,000, you're talking $165,000 per search. So as you think about that, that really adds up. By putting in and insourcing our exec recruiting, we've been able to save over $1 million a year by not going out and looking at search firms. I do want to introduce my partner in this. Paula Freericks is with us today. She joined us about a year ago now and has just been fabulous in this work. So we've really said, why don't we bring that on roll, that responsibility on roll, to make sure that we're doing it. But there's a lot of other reasons other than cost. Certainly that's a driving force. It is part of our larger succession planning strategy. When we started our journey, our Baldrige journey, if we looked at our leadership, we really brought in 70% of our leadership positions were filled externally and only 30% were filled internally. And you're going to see in a second, that's not always successful because new leaders coming in from outside is very, very difficult. So we have spent a lot of our resources and a lot of our time really looking at how do we develop leaders from within our organization, how do we change that, and we really targeted how do we end up with 70% of our leadership positions being filled internally, 30% externally, so just reverse what we were doing, and we wanted to spend our time that way. Third, though, we wanted to provide a consistent, high-quality, and inclusive process, and something that we actually developed our leaders on how to do hiring leaders. So really spend some time on that and make sure, and I'm going to take you through the process in just a second. We've decreased our time to fill. Again, if you're out looking for a search firm, you spend the first 30 days figuring out who's going to do it, which leaves you 30 days behind in this process. But the last two are the most important. What we have found is we've been able to get a much better cultural fit, and we've really been able to spend more time with the candidates and building a relationship with the candidates. If you think of the normal executive recruiting process, your partner in this, your company, does most of the time with the candidates, and you get to see them for the hour interviews and all that. We now spend a great deal of time, Paula in particular, really getting to know our candidates, and we think that's important. Why do we think it's important? I could have put up 17 different slides on hiring failures for leaders and executives. I like this one. It's easy. It's like a flip of a coin. About 50% of the people that are hired externally and brought in fail in the first 2 years. So with that kind of failure rate and with the cost of it, how do you improve it? How do you make sure you're doing everything possible to make sure you're getting a good external hire and someone who's going to fit in your organization? Again, I'm going to do just 2 or 3 slides on our internal, because again, I think it's very important to hook that in. This is an eye chart. It's certainly in the slides that you'll receive. But this is our process. Part of our Baldrige journey was to put in a very strong succession planning process, not just on identification, but we put in a strong performance management process to make sure we had consistency in how we were evaluating our leaders. We put in identification with talent review teams at each of our business units, including our medical group. We have succession plans for all of our chair positions, all of our senior leadership positions. And we then bubble that up from every one of the business units, and our senior leaders all get together and agree on if we have an opening. For instance, right now we have an opening at Wyandotte for a chief operating officer. We have a succession plan for that identifies people throughout our system that'll be considered for that. And we also in here do a lot of work around leadership development. And I know I just heard 2 presentations on leadership development. This slide is busy, but what it really says is on the left-hand side of that pyramid, we identify all of the leadership programs, New Leader, Leadership Academy, Advanced Leadership Academy. Both that leadership and advanced are based on those succession plans, who gets to attend those programs. And the blue detail around it says that 20% of those positions are reserved for our physicians. On the right-hand slide is it really our exclusive physician leadership. It begins with a new physician leadership academy. We have an MD content, which I would say is a mini MBA for our physicians that they can attend, and then our Physician Leadership Institute. So we put together a very strong leadership development program to get from that only putting 30%. And how do we measure success? We see what we've done. If you looked 5 years out, as I said earlier, we were only filling 30% internally, 70% externally. And as you can see in 2013, we filled 67% of our leadership positions internally, and we are on track to make that 70-30 this year. So we measure success that way. We also measure it based on our retention. We've been able to retain the people that we've identified, and this is just examples of the Advanced Leadership Academy and the Physician Institute. We have an 88% retention on our Advanced Leadership Academy participants, 94% retention on our Physician Institute. And I think the bottom of this slide is the other one that's really important. On our engagement of our workforce, for those leaders in our Advanced Leadership Academy, on a 1 to 5 scale, their engagement scores for their teams was 0.31 higher than the remainder of our organization. So we're doing a good job of not only identifying the right people, we're developing those people, and we're retaining them. So a very important part of our program. So how do we ensure the success of that other 30%? So now we flip that, and we only have that flip of the coin on 30% of our outside hires, but that is still a big challenge for us. And we think it starts with first understanding our stakeholder requirements, and I will show you in our process that we spend a good 30 days up front making sure we really understand what we're looking for, and that's mainly around culture, not on technical skills. It starts with a robust hiring process with many interviewers and many steps, and I'll go through that in a second. The third bullet, very important, it's about a strong cultural fit. And we do a lot in the search process to spend time with the candidate, but also we invest our money in a full-day simulated assessment that is done with a lead assessor and a consistent person who knows our culture, and they take every one of our final candidates through a full-day simulated assessment to make sure that we know that we're getting someone who's going to fit in our culture. And then we conduct thorough reference checks. We also ensure that the spouse and significant other is an enthusiastic participant in the move. And you might think, why? But it's very important. If you don't have that spouse and significant other thrilled and happy to come to Detroit, wants to be there, wants to be part of Henry Ford, it's a real issue. For matter of fact, if we look back at our last 4 years of hiring executives, we have lost one right now, and that was totally because the spouse didn't embrace Detroit and it didn't work, and they went home. So it really is an important part of that. We actually have a relocation partner that we use for that, not a broker or a realtor, but a relocation partner to really spend time with that significant other up front. And then we have a robust onboarding process that we use, including all of our leaders, no matter how experienced they are, go through a 5-day New Leader Academy. We have a cultural immersion called Creating One Henry Ford that everyone goes through. We actually do meet with the hired executive within the first 2 weeks of their joining Henry Ford. We take them through their assessment, their simulated assessment result, with a lead assessor, making sure they understand why they were chosen, but where are those areas we need to work on. And then we assign an assimilation coach for every one of them to make sure that they have that. So I'm going to take you very quickly through the process and then open this up to conversation. So if you look at the first 30 days, the pre-interviewing, what do? We identify a search committee, and we have anywhere from 8 to 10 people on every search for our top leaders. We go through and review the job description. We conduct 80 to 100 stakeholder interviews. Some of those are obviously in groups with all kinds of individuals, so we really look and understand what our stakeholders say they're looking for, and we redesign our job description based on that. We make sure that we really know not just the what, but how we want them to get their job done and what the cultural fit is for that particular organization. And we think that that is very, very important. Over the next 60 days, that's when we really begin the search, and we post both internally and externally, but we are not satisfied with a post and pray type of system. So we also go out and invite everyone who's on our Ready Now or our 1 to 2 years for that particular position. I personally call each one of our internal candidates and invite them to be part of the search process. We make it clear, though, that every one of our openings, we interview both internal and external. We don't say it's going to be just an internal search for these positions, because even though we think we're developing great physician leaders and administrative leaders, we want to make sure that we've got the best person on that job. So even though we've done all our work that we've done on that internal, we want to make sure that we open it up to external. And then we use social media. You know, one of the reasons, again, I think our executive search firm colleagues out there feel that they can do that was because it's about finding the candidates. It's not about the process or any of that, because we do most of that anyway, right? But it's really, how do you source and how do you make sure you're finding all those candidates? With social media, it's really changed the game. So we are spending a great deal of time networking, making sure our colleagues at Henry Ford who would know people in the particular area we're looking for, and we have had just fabulous candidates. We then go through our first round of interview, and we do up from 5 to 10 first round candidates. We pick the best we've seen, and we've really, if it's 10 candidates or anything above 5, we do a 2-day. Our committee, it's a group interview, and the entire search committee spends those full 1 or 2 days, and we do group interviews. All of the questions are customized based on what we've heard from our stakeholders of what we're looking for. And our goal out of that first round interview is to identify the top 2 or 3 candidates to go to our second round of interviews. We then go to start the second round of interviews with those 2 or 3 candidates. We have in-depth interviews then. It's more of one-on-one or one-on-2 type of interviews, and really get into some deeper discussions. We also schedule that full day simulated assessment. So each of those 2 or 3 candidates go through a full day of assessments, simulated assessment. They have homework that they do ahead of time. They prepare, and they spend a day in the life of an executive. And then we do include our meeting with our direct reports at that point in time to get their input. And that's the time when we would invite their spouse, significant other to join us and really spend time with a relocation partner if they're from out of state, to ensure that they really do know about Detroit, know about our schools, et cetera. And then we get to our final step, which really is we put together the reference checking. We actually have our lead assessor come in, the hiring manager's in the room, the entire search committee's there. We go through the interviews and the scores on the interviews. We use a matrix to show how each of the candidates did. We go through that simulated assessment results and the reference checks, and we make our final offer and final recommendation. We've said if we got through that first round of interviews where we went through and we didn't find the right candidates, that's the point where we would talk about, do we need an executive search firm? That hasn't happened yet. So we have felt very confident in the candidates that we have identified and selected. The last part of this is really, and a very important part, is the onboarding and the assimilation process. As I mentioned, we hold a meeting in the first 2 weeks to really take the new executive through their assessment results, really help them identify how they will fit, where will the difficulties be. That lead coach spends time with them. And then we put a full assimilation plan together, including checklist, everything from the mundane to the very complicated. We find mentors for our new leaders and make sure they not only have a coach, but we do hire an assimilation coach for them for the first 6 months, and we make sure they have mentors and other things that they need to be successful. So that's the process we put in place. What are the lessons we've learned so far? First, take time to do your homework up front. That stakeholder interviews, the time we're spending to get ready is very important. We do develop our interview questions based on the stakeholder requirements, not canned type of questions. I think one of the things that was our biggest learning is we were doing what I would call a CAN type of video pre-screening where they could do it at their leisure, but they'd have to answer certain questions. It was really too stiff, and it really didn't give us a really good idea if these candidates were going to fit within Henry Ford. So Paula and I are now changing that so that we really do get to meet the candidates and know them and see them and that type of thing. Listen carefully to the simulated assessment results. The couple times we've said, nah, we know better, that's not really true, we've been disappointed. And we've learned very quickly that that assessment works. It really is confirming, and when there's a red flag that goes up, we do listen to that red flag. The onboarding and the first 100-day assimilation process is key. Really making sure that your leader gets all the attention and all the tools that they need to make sure that they can be successful. The worst thing you can do is have them come, hit the ground running. And you know, a lot of our leaders, the new leaders, want to do that. They don't want anyone to think, boy, I needed help or I needed something else, but we found that that was very, very important. And then lastly, it's time consuming. I'm not going to kid you, we spend a lot of time, I personally spend a lot of time on exec recruiting, but as we look at what we're doing as far as transitioning our leadership and making sure that we have the right people, I think it's a great investment in our time.